why did we have to accept it? And how far are all of us, or many of us in this room, guilty? Why do we have to accept as a given that it is inconceivable that we should have a different ratio from 20% of the burden on tax and 80% on cuts? A debate between the parties, because Mr. Labour was really suggesting 30-70. Why have we got into this situation? It is unthinkable that we should have a higher level of taxation to pay for a society worth living. And that if we do things to provide the social infrastructure we need, we almost do them apologetically and by stealth and try to hide the taxation implications. I happen to believe that if you're a member of society, you pay the membership fee for society. And I know that whether you're talking about the environment, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about education, whatever you're talking about, transport or the rest, we cannot possibly achieve a decent, wholesome society on the basis of private expenditure alone. We have to pull together as a nation. So surely, just as we're going in the defence review, so we're told, to take, as it were, a clean sheet of paper and say, what are the challenges, what are the threats, what do we need to meet them, and we must not be beholden to existing traditional patterns of expenditure on defence, because we dare to do new things that we need. Why don't we start by having a debate about what kind of society we want and what sort of society we need, how much we believe that social expenditure and public provision and social infrastructure matters as distinct from private affluence. After all, it was Galbraith who coined that brilliant phrase of private wealth and public squalor, and private affluence and public squalor. It doesn't have to be. Now, all I'm saying is, why is that debate happening? The next point I want to make is that it was to me, as a former development minister, very cheering to see that in this general election, all the political parties, without exception, all the principal leading political parties, ring-fenced the aid budget. Back in my time, one certainly could not have taken that for granted. And even more important than ring-fencing the aid budget was the commitment to 0.7% of GNP by 2014. We certainly couldn't have taken that for granted in my days. And I think a tremendous tribute goes to the NGOs and organisations like this who put so much pressure in, and so much into the fight to change the public culture and the political commitment on this. But of course, it's what happens within that expenditure. It's not just the amount of money, it's not just the resources. And I find it difficult, for all the reasons that Richard was giving and others, to believe that we're going to be able to achieve sustained growth, achieve sustained improvement, social qualitative improvement in the condition of men and women, unless we tackle some of these issues I've just been mentioning in the national context. What is to be the prevailing political culture? What is to balance the deal between premium put on public expenditure and social infrastructure and the premium put on private wealth? Now, of course, a major part of this is that you can't cut up cake until you bake it, and you have to be certain that you've got enough resources going into producing the wealth which you need to build your society. So there is a huge issue there about not just what the quantity of aid is, but how it is used, and what the context within which it is used will be. My last two very brief points, although not, I think brief, but not insignificant, are these. We talk, and Richard's talked, about the need for a redistribution of wealth and a redistribution of resources. What has bugged me more and more in recent years is that there are very large numbers of people out there in the world, and indeed in our own society, but out there in the world, who are absolutely exasperated by being excluded from the power systems of the world. They are exasperated and fed up with constantly being told what they must do, being constantly told what the context of the management of the world should be to which they must respond. And when they are consulted, it seems to them that they are consulted about the agenda others have established rather than participating in the formation of the agenda. Does the agenda actually reflect their priorities and their preoccupations? And then from that standpoint, I'm absolutely certain that if we're to have a secure and stable world, in one way or another, we have to have a redistribution of power. It's not just a redistribution of resources, it's not just a redistribution of wealth, it's also a redistribution of power. We have to look at the institutional arrangements in the world. I mean, it is simply crazy that we still have a Security Council at the UN in which the 5 permanent members are the same 5 permanent members that were in 1945. It doesn't reflect the world we're living in at all. But that's just an oversimplified example. It also seems to be crazy that we talk about the G7, we talk about the IMF, we talk about the World Bank, and we see them as something separate, the point on which Richard dwelled. We see it as separate from the work of the Security Council. I don't see how many modern concepts of security you can possibly talk about it intelligently without taking into account the economic and social issues in the world, because they're all part of building security, because this alienated population that I was describing a moment ago has amongst it some very bright, highly educated people, and it doesn't take very many people in our very vulnerable high-tech world, it doesn't take very many people to do some horrible things, and if we want stability and security, we better get on with facing this issue of the excluded and their feeling of exasperation at the existing power structure. That is crucial to our own security. On the last point is simply the one on education. And this, I think, I'm so glad that Richard raised it, because I really am quite concerned about this. If we have an acquisitive society, as I said, the market and liberal economics without the ethics and the social responsibility which was so important to Adam Smith, if we have that, we will have people going to the top, a meritocracy inevitably in some way. Meritocracy in terms of it's not a misuse of the term, of the culture, of acquisitiveness. Are we going to really condone a system of education in effect globally, which is saying, oh yes, well the meritocracy, the advantaged people will be able to look after in their middle class communities the educational needs of their children around. And other children, of course, yes, they must be educated, but they're educated to fit unquestioningly into the system. They're there to service the system. What they really need is vocational education. Well, I don't for the life of me see why the hell a carpenter or an engineer or a practical person shouldn't have had an opportunity to think, to enjoy literature, to be able to develop a critical mind, to be able to evaluate what is being said to them by the media and politics. Why should that be left to the people living in existing middle-class communities? Is it real to think that when we talk about society getting together to organise its own schools, that in my depressed, I live in Cumbria these days, and the depressed coast of West Cumbria, with endemic unemployment and the rest, with absolute desert of aspiration education, you're going to be able to see all sorts of parents emerging from somewhere to organise schools and make a great success of them to overcome the deprivation and disadvantage there. It's cuckoo-like. Meanwhile, in the part of Cumbria in which I live, believe you me, we shall be having wonderful primary schools and secondary schools. We've got them already. These are the issues we've got to address, and if we're addressing them in our own society, we've got to address them internationally. Because if I was asked to pick one issue, this is my conclusion, one issue that preoccupies me almost more than any other